The room fell silent before the echo of his words even faded. "I'll give you $100,000 if you serve me in Chinese." The voice belonged to Richard Blackwood, real estate magnate and self-appointed king of the Prestige Club. His laughter rolled across the marble floor like a command, and every head in the restaurant turned toward the waitress holding a tray of crystal flutes. The bills landed on silver with a sound that was too sharp to be mistaken for generosity. One, then another, until the tray gleamed with green, $100,000 in front of New York's richest men. No one spoke. The orchestra in the corner stopped mid-note. The air thickened with the kind of silence that only money can buy. Jasmine Williams didn't move. The tray in her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of every eye now fixed on her. To the regular clients of the Prestige Club, she was invisible, the quiet woman who refilled champagne without a sound. None of them knew that she once taught linguistics at Columbia University, that she had written papers on phonetic systems and stood on academic stages in Beijing. Now, in a black uniform and borrowed heels, she looked like every other worker they ignored. Richard leaned back in his Italian leather chair, his smile wide enough to show every dollar of dental perfection. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Not enough zeros for you?" He gestured to the 3 Japanese investors at his table, all dressed in gray suits, men who had traveled across oceans for a deal. "My friends here will judge whether your Chinese is good enough. Think of it as entertainment." A ripple of laughter moved through the hall, thin and cruel. The maitre d' shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Every table around them turned into an audience, pretending to chew while waiting for the show to begin. Jasmine looked at the money again. It was more than she had earned in 2 years. Enough to pay her mother's hospital debt, enough to buy silence. But this was never about money. It was about power, the kind that hides behind expensive suits and expects the world to applaud its cruelty. Richard's voice cut through again. "Come on, honey. I'm giving you a chance to prove you're more than just a waitress, unless, of course, you don't even know how to say thank you in Chinese." He clapped slowly, the sound echoing like mock applause in an empty theater. The investors exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, the elder with gold-rimmed glasses, lowered his eyes, ashamed for being part of it. But no one spoke. No one ever did. Jasmine's fingers tightened on the tray until her knuckles turned white. For a moment, she wasn't in the Prestige Club anymore. She was back in a lecture hall, chalk dust floating in the light, her students listening as she spoke about the rhythm of tonal languages. That life felt like a lifetime ago, before the phone call that changed everything, before hospital bills and foreclosure notices replaced research grants. When she opened her mouth, her voice came out steady. "I accept." Richard froze for half a second. "I'm sorry, what?" "I accept your offer," she repeated. Her tone was calm, almost clinical. "I'll serve you in Chinese, and when I'm done, you will pay me the 100,000 here, in front of everyone." The laughter stopped. Someone at a nearby table dropped a fork. The investors looked at each other. Richard chuckled, a dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Perfect. Let's make this official. If you fail, you'll apologize right here, in front of everyone, for wasting our time. Have it body have to dod and any effective content." Jasmine nodded once. Agreed. Her calm unsettled him. He expected tears, excuses, maybe a nervous laugh, not this composure. He didn't know that he had just handed her the one thing she'd been waiting 3 years for. A public stage. The club's lighting shimmered off glass and gold. Outside, New York pulsed with the rhythm of ambition. Inside, one woman stood against a table of power, her silence louder than their laughter. Richard leaned forward, voice dripping with confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a show." Jasmine set down the tray. The bills remained where they lay, green and gleaming like poison. Her hands were free now. She met his gaze without blinking. "You wanted a performance, Mr. Blackwood," she said quietly. "Then let's make it unforgettable." The laughter returned, uneasy this time, forced. The maitre d' gestured for the waiter to close the doors. The restaurant became a theater of humiliation. At least, that's what they thought. But in the stillness that followed, as Richard signaled for the cameras to start recording the fun, Jasmine's heartbeat slowed. She had faced worse, and for the first time in years, she felt something familiar: control. The show had begun. Only no one yet knew who the lesson was for. For a moment, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The glittering chandeliers above reflected a world that had always belonged to men like Richard Blackwood, men who believed laughter was proof of power. Beneath that light, Jasmine stood perfectly still, her calm presence creating a silence so deep that even the hum of air conditioning sounded like judgment. Richard's grin widened. "Someone get her a menu," he said. "Let's see how long this illusion lasts." The waiter hesitated. Everyone knew what was happening, but no one wanted to stop it. Not the manager, not the clients, not the servers frozen mid-step. It was the same paralysis Jasmine had seen 100 times before, the kind that turns decency into complicity. When the leather-bound menu finally landed on the table, Richard flipped it open with exaggerated showmanship. "We'll make it interesting," he said. "You'll present our specials in perfect Mandarin. If you can't, you'll kneel and apologize for pretending to be something you're not. Lev there in a distine 23. The words struck harder than the money. Pretending to be something you're not. That sentence had followed her everywhere since the day her old world collapsed. 3 years earlier, Jasmine Williams had been doctor. Williams, a woman who filled lecture halls with her voice, who explained to students how language could build bridges between cultures, how every tone carried a heartbeat. Then came the diagnosis. Her mother, stage 4, insurance that didn't cover, hospitals that didn't wait. She sold everything, the apartment with the city view, the books that once defined her, the life she had built from nothing. The university filled her position before she even sent the resignation letter. Colleagues stopped replying to messages, friends disappeared. And yet, through the ruins, she never stopped listening, to the rhythm of accents, to the melody of words. Every night after her double shifts, she opened her old laptop and read research papers from Beijing, revisiting the sounds that had once made her feel alive. Now, standing in front of Richard Blackwood, she realized that silence had become her language, the pause before power, the breath before truth. Richard mistook it for fear. "What's wrong?" he sneered. "Too many syllables." She didn't answer. Her stillness was unnerving him. The investors shifted in their seats. One of them, Hiroshi, cleared his throat. "Richard," he began gently, "maybe this is not necessary." But Richard's pride was a wildfire. Reason only fed it. "Oh, it's necessary," he said. "I'm teaching a lesson about honesty. You'd be amazed how often people fake expertise. She's one of them." His words echoed through the room, but Jasmine wasn't listening to him anymore. She was listening to rhythm, the beating of her pulse against the quiet, the vibration of her breath. She remembered a night in Beijing when her professor had scolded her for mispronouncing the third tone. "If you cannot feel the sound in your chest, you will never master the language," he had said. Now she felt it. Not fear, not anger, but precision. "I accept all your conditions," she said, interrupting him. Her voice was calm, deliberate. Richard blinked. "Even the kneeling part?" "Yes," she replied, eyes steady. "Even that." A hush fell over the tables. It wasn't the silence of curiosity anymore. It was the silence of disbelief. No one had ever spoken to Richard Blackwood like that in public. He leaned back, trying to reclaim control. "Perfect," he said, forcing a smile. "Then let's make it official. $200,000 if you somehow impress me. But when you fail, and you will, you work here for free for a month." The Japanese investors exchanged glances again, discomfort now obvious. "Richard," Kenji said quietly, "this is cruel." Richard didn't care. "Cruelty?" He laughed. "No, this is education." The word education hit her like an electric current. Education. He didn't even realize how much that word still belonged to her. Jasmine straightened her back, her hands resting lightly on the tray. "Deal," she said simply. Richard's grin faltered again. Somewhere behind him, a phone camera clicked on. Someone was recording. The live stream had begun. She could already imagine the comments. "Who does she think she is? She's going to embarrass herself. Look at her face when she fails." But none of that mattered. She was done being invisible. Her gaze moved from Richard to the 3 investors. "Gentlemen," she said softly, "since we are turning dinner into a demonstration, I'll make sure it's worthy of your attention." Yuki Sato, the youngest of the 3, looked intrigued. "You speak Mandarin?" She smiled faintly. "Fluently. But tonight, I'll let the words prove it." The waiter approached with the menu, thick, embossed in gold, written entirely in Chinese characters. Jasmine took it in both hands, the way a musician lifts an instrument. For the first time that night, she allowed herself a small, quiet breath. It was the same breath she always took before a lecture, before she began to speak. She looked up. "Shall we begin?" Richard raised his glass, pretending to toast. "By all means, doctor," he said mockingly. "Educate us." He didn't know he had just spoken the truth. The crowd leaned forward. The chandeliers flickered. The city lights outside blurred into a silent backdrop of expectation. And there, under the weight of every prejudice ever spoken in that room, Jasmine turned the page of the menu, her expression unreadable, her resolve absolute. The lesson was about to start. The menu opened like a curtain to her past life. Columns of Mandarin characters glimmered under the light, delicate as brush strokes on porcelain. To the crowd, they were foreign symbols. To her, they were home. Richard crossed his legs, swirling his wine as if he already knew the ending. "All right, Miss Williams," he said, his tone theatrical. "Impress us. Tell us what's for dinner." Jasmine didn't rush. She turned the pages carefully, letting the silence stretch until it became almost unbearable. Then she looked at the investors instead of Richard. "Before I begin," she said gently, "may I ask, do any of you speak Mandarin?" Hiroshi hesitated. "A little," he admitted. Kenji shook his head. "Just the basics." Yuki raised his hand. "I'm fluent," he said, his voice calm but curious. "I lived in Taiwan for 10 years. Jasmine nodded once. "Good. Then at least one of you will know I'm not pretending." Richard forced a laugh that came out too loud. "Oh, please. You could say anything, and we'd have to believe you." Her eyes met his. "Then listen carefully. See their 200 knot combinations forly." And just like that, she began. The first sound was soft but exact, a tone that rolled like water over stone. Mandarin, fluent, steady, unbroken. The words fell into rhythm, each syllable precise, each pause deliberate. Yuki sat forward instantly. His expression shifted from polite interest to astonishment. "Her pronunciation," he whispered in Japanese, "is flawless." "After vendor," Jasmine continued, describing dishes with poetic accuracy. Mapo tofu prepared with Sichuan chili aged 2 years, the scent of fermented beans that speaks of fire and patience. Her tone rose and fell like music. She wasn't just translating a menu, she was conducting it. The investors leaned closer, captivated. Even the servers froze in place. Richard's smirk faltered. "What's she saying?" he demanded. Yuki didn't answer. He was too busy listening. When Jasmine finished the first dish, she closed the menu halfway, letting the weight of her words settle. Then she switched languages, effortlessly, her voice now carrying the softer cadence of Cantonese. "In Hong Kong," she said, still addressing the investors, "we would present the same meal with a different philosophy. Simplicity as elegance, flavor as truth." The room gasped. Even those who didn't understand could feel the mastery in her tone. Richard's glass slipped from his hand and hit the table. Wine spread like a dark stain. "What the hell? What language is that?" Yuki answered quietly. "Cantonese. Perfect accent. Native level." The laughter that once filled the Prestige Club was gone. In its place was something heavier. Awe. Jasmine turned the page again. "Perhaps," she said softly, "you'd prefer Taiwanese Mandarin next. They have downed markars." Before he could respond, she switched once more, her voice adjusting seamlessly, the tonal shifts so subtle they seemed impossible. The sentences flowed like silk. Every investor at the table was now sitting upright, listening with reverence. When she stopped, the silence that followed was absolute. Then, in English, she looked at Richard and asked, "Would you like me to continue?" His mouth opened, but no sound came out. She closed the menu and placed it gently on the table. "I think that's enough for now," she said, "but perhaps I should introduce myself properly." Her tone changed, not louder, not harsher, but sharper, like glass catching the light. "My name is Dr. Jasmine Williams, Ph.D. in computational linguistics from Columbia University, postdoctoral research at MIT in Chinese dialectology, visiting scholar at Beijing Foreign Studies University, author of Linguistic Bridges, published by Cambridge University Press. He was not retisate of the batter in the cost prinzevriabald, and tenturely turnitip. A collective intake of breath rippled across the room. Richard blinked rapidly, his tan complexion draining pale. That's not possible. You're a waitress. Tonight, yes, she said calmly. But before life tested me, I taught at universities you've only ever driven past. The investors looked at each other, not with pity, but with respect. Yuki nodded slowly. Dr. Williams, he said, your Mandarin was extraordinary. Truly. She inclined her head slightly. Thank you. En raperative leaken should resta. Richard tried to recover, his pride grasping for air. That doesn't prove anything. Anyone can memorize lines. She met his eyes again. Then test me. He hesitated. Pick a word, she said. Any word in Chinese, business, or culinary. I'll tell you the dialect, the tone, and the meaning. He froze, realizing he didn't know a single one. The room waited. Every heartbeat sounded louder than breath. When he stayed silent, she smiled, not cruelly, just sadly. Knowledge, she said softly, isn't performance, Mr. Blackwood. It's presence. The chandeliers shimmered again, refracting light across her face. For a moment, it was as if the world remembered how to breathe. The man who thought he could humiliate her had just turned into a student, one who didn't even know class had begun. The hum of the room had changed. It was no longer the murmur of wealth and gossip. It was the quiet awe that fills a place when power shifts, silently, irrevocably. Jasmine stood there, poised, one hand resting lightly on the menu. Her calm was surgical, her presence magnetic. She spoke again, this time in flawless Mandarin, her tone smooth as glass. Let us continue, she said. The second course is Peking duck, prepared in the traditional Quanjude style, first established in 1864. The process requires 24 hours of marinating, followed by slow roasting in a fruitwood oven to achieve the balance between crispness and fragrance. Her words were not just sounds. They carried centuries of culture, echoing with reverence. Yuki translated quietly for the others. She's explaining every detail with technical precision. Even native speakers wouldn't describe it this well. The other investors watched in silence. Even the maitre d', who had tried earlier to fade into the background, now leaned slightly forward, as if afraid to miss a single word. Jasmine turned another page. The third dish, she said in Mandarin, is xiaolongbao, soup dumplings crafted with exactly 18 folds. In Chinese numerology, 18 symbolizes prosperity. Inside each, the broth is made by gelatinizing pork marrow, which melts during steaming. This technique dates back to the Ming Dynasty. There's a stod for Mary Dan, maybe inning said believe. Her voice was steady, controlled. There was no trace of anger, only mastery. Across the table, Richard's fingers twitched on his glass. He couldn't look away, but he couldn't understand a word. He had built his empire on arrogance, on convincing others that wealth meant wisdom. But now, faced with a woman he had dismissed as a servant, he was learning that ignorance has a price. Enough, he said suddenly, voice trembling with forced authority. This isn't about language. This is about respect. Jasmine finished for him in perfect English, her voice soft but absolute. Yes, it is. He blinked, stunned by how calm she remained. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Who are you really? He demanded, his tone cracking. I already told you, she replied. I'm Dr. Jasmine Williams, and once upon a time, I believed that intelligence could protect a person from humiliation. I was wrong. But I also learned something else, that true education is not about knowing words, it's about knowing when to speak them. The silence after that line was like a storm about to break. Hiroshi adjusted his glasses. Mr. Blackwood, he said softly, you've made a grave mistake tonight. Richard turned on him. You don't understand. She's been pretending to be something she's not. Hiroshi's tone hardened. No, that would be you. The entire room froze. Kenji leaned in, his voice low but cold. You humiliated a scholar in public, a woman who has more education and dignity than you will ever possess. The words sliced through the air like a sentence being handed down. Jasmine didn't smile. She simply stood there, composed, her chin slightly lifted. "Mr. Blackwood," she said quietly, "you offered me $200,000 to prove my worth. I did. Now please, honor your promise." The blood drained from his face. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious when I'm working," she said. The crowd shifted. A few people at nearby tables whispered, phones raised discreetly. Someone was live streaming. The image of the mighty Richard Blackwood being cornered by the calm, unshakable Waitress was already circling the internet. He opened his wallet with shaking hands, peeling off stacks of bills. The green paper looked smaller than before, almost pitiful in his trembling fingers. He placed them one by one on the table. "There, you have your money. Are you satisfied now?" Jasmine looked at the pile but didn't touch it. "Not yet," she said softly. "You forgot something." Richard frowned. "What?" "The apology," she replied. "Not to me. To everyone you've ever belittled for looking different, sounding different, or earning less than you." The silence that followed was suffocating. The investors stared at him, waiting. Richard swallowed hard. "Say it," she said. His voice cracked. "I apologize." She didn't move. Louder. "I apologize." The words echoed through the marble hall like a confession. It was over. No shouting, no victory pose, just the quiet collapse of arrogance beneath the weight of truth. Jasmine picked up her tray, steady as ever. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she said, bowing slightly. "That will be all." As she walked away, the entire restaurant turned to watch her. No one applauded, but every eye followed her with quiet reverence. Behind her, Richard sank into his chair, the sound of his own breath suddenly unbearable. What no one knew was that the recording would reach millions before dawn, a single clip titled "Waitress Speaks 9 Languages, Shuts Down Billionaire." And by morning, the empire he had built on ego would begin to crumble. The video spread across the world before sunrise. By morning, it had reached 15 million views. The title alone carried the weight of poetic justice. "Racist Tycoon Destroyed by Dr. Waitress." Every corner of the internet replayed that night at the Prestige Club. The quiet voice, the flawless Mandarin, the trembling billionaire forced to apologize. What Richard Blackwood had meant as humiliation had turned into a global lesson about dignity. By the end of the week, he was trending for all the wrong reasons. His investors withdrew. Banks froze his loans. Partners cut their ties overnight. His wife filed for divorce. His children stopped answering his calls. Within 3 months, his empire, once worth hundreds of millions, was gone. Richard Blackwood, the man who once bought respect with money, now sold cars at a dealership in Queens, repeating polite phrases he never meant, learning the hard way what humility sounded like. But Jasmine Williams never looked back. 6 months later, the elevator doors opened to the 47th floor of Tanaka Yamamoto International. The brass plaque on the wall read, "Director of Intercultural Relations, Dr. Jasmine Williams." She stood by the window, looking out at Manhattan, the same skyline that once felt unreachable. The city hadn't changed, but she had. The quiet resilience that carried her through every insult, every sleepless night, now defined her presence. Her office was filled with light, with books stacked neatly along the wall, language and power, bridges of meaning, cultural syntax. Her name appeared again, not on a name tag, but on a hardcover spine. Yuki Sato, the investor who had defended her that night, stopped by her office door. "Dr. Williams," he said in his careful English, "I wanted you to know, the presentation you gave today was exceptional. Our partners in Tokyo were deeply moved." "Thank you, Mr. Sato," she replied, smiling. "I just told the truth." He nodded slowly. "You always did." When he left, Jasmine sat for a moment, breathing in the quiet. On her desk lay a framed photo, her mother, Dorothy, smiling in her garden. The woman who had fought through a stroke and now, thanks to her daughter's new position, received the best care money could buy. Life had come full circle. Later that month, Columbia University invited her back, not as a student, not as an employee, but as a guest lecturer. The hall was packed. Students leaned forward, phones recording every word. She began without notes. "There was a time," she said, "when I thought failure meant losing everything. But failure, like language, depends on translation. What others call humiliation can become revelation if you have the courage to let it." A pause. The audience held still. "Someone once told me that people like me didn't belong in places of power, that intelligence had a color and dignity had a price. But here's what I learned. You don't need permission to be worthy. You only need proof and patience." When she finished, the hall erupted into applause. Some students stood, tears shining in their eyes. For them, she wasn't just a speaker. She was a symbol of every person who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. Afterward, a reporter asked her what she felt the night she spoke 9 languages before a billionaire. She smiled faintly. "Nothing extraordinary," she said. "Just fluency, in more than words." Outside, autumn sunlight flooded the campus. The air was crisp, filled with the sound of distant laughter. Jasmine walked alone beneath the old trees, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. Every step was deliberate, every breath free. And somewhere in Queens, Richard Blackwood looked up at a television in the dealership showroom and saw her face again. Dr. Jasmine Williams, guest on a global leadership panel. The chyron beneath her read, "How knowledge defeats arrogance." He turned away, but her voice lingered from the screen. "Respect," she was saying, "isn't granted by money or title. It's earned, one word, one act, one truth at a time." For a moment, he almost smiled. Then he whispered, barely audible, she was right. Back in her office that evening, Jasmine stood by the window as the city lights flickered to life. She thought about the past, the restaurant, the crowd, the fear that once ruled her, and how small it all seemed now. She whispered to herself, "They tried to shame me with silence. But I learned that silence can speak louder than cruelty." Number tings, number tings. And as the night deepened over Manhattan, her reflection in the glass looked not like a waitress, nor even a survivor, but a woman who had turned every wound into wisdom. Because the truest language of strength is grace.